Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable life and incredible resilience of humanity's earliest ancestors, the people we often call cavemen. These were the everyday heroes of prehistory, who, despite endless odds, managed to survive some of the coldest and most brutal nights our world has ever known. From clever makeshift insulation tricks to communal sleeping strategies, their story is one of grit, ingenuity, and pure determination. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. What did cavemen actually do all day? The world back then was raw and newborn, a place where every horizon felt infinite and every night could last forever. There were no names yet for the mountains, no borders, no maps, no memory written on paper, only the breathing of the wind through grass, the slow roll of clouds over stone, and small human hearts beating inside the vast silence of the Ice Age. At the edge of a glacier, a band of people stirred from their sleep. The air was so cold that breath froze before it rose. Their cave, a hollow of limestone and smoke, smelled of ash, hides, and life. A faint red glow pulsed from the hearth, the last embers of the night's fire, and that glow meant everything. Without it, the cold would claim them before dawn. The first task each morning was not to eat, not to hunt, but to wake the fire. A woman reached forward with steady hands, blew softly until sparks bloomed again into flame. That small act was a miracle repeated every day of the world. Around her, others stretched from furs, men rubbing warmth into their arms, children still half asleep, an elder murmuring to himself in the language of memory. No one spoke loudly. Even sound felt fragile in that frozen air. Outside, the sun rose pale and thin, casting long stripes of silver light across snow. The valley below glittered with frost, and far off, a herd of mammoth moved slowly through the haze, great dark shapes breathing clouds into morning. Life followed rhythm instead of schedule. When the light came, they moved. Two hunters shouldered spears of fire-hardened wood, checking the flint points with practiced fingers. They stepped into the snow without ceremony, following tracks only they could read. Behind them, a young boy carried a basket of stone flakes. Today he would learn to make a knife, his first lesson in the endless language of survival. Back at the cave, the rest of the group began their own rituals. One scraped hides clean with a sharp bone, another twisted sinew into cord. The smell of smoke thickened as a pot of melted snow warmed over the fire. There was no waste, no luxury. Every movement had purpose, every object a story. When the hunters returned hours later, they carried meat from a reindeer felled near the frozen stream. It was not triumph, it was relief. Food was life for another day. They roasted strips over the coals while the children pressed close, eyes bright in the orange light. Fat dripped into the fire and hissed. For a moment the cave smelled like feast. After eating they worked again. Flint cracked beneath hammerstone, sending sharp echoes into the dark. Shards flew like glass, each one becoming blade, scraper or spear tip. Hands bled sometimes, small cuts that hardened into knowledge. To make a perfect edge was to understand patience. When the day shortened, the world turned blue. The wind climbed down from the glacier and even the animals fell quiet. They gathered wood, banked the fire high, and sealed the cave mouth with furs to keep the warmth in. Outside, the night sang with wolves. Inside, firelight danced over painted walls, shapes of bison and deer drawn in ochre and charcoal. These were not decorations, but promises, memories captured so the world would remember what they hunted, what they loved, what they feared. As the flames dimmed, they lay close together on bedding of grass and hide. Breath mingled, heartbeats slowed. Somewhere in the dark, a child whispered a question, and the elder answered not with words, but with a soft hum, the first lullaby. The fire cracked once more, casting brief gold across their faces, and sleep came like snow, quiet, deep, and full of dreams of another dawn. Fire. It is difficult for us now to imagine what it meant to them. The first people, standing beneath a sky filled with cold stars, watching a single spark leap from wood and change everything. To us, fire is ordinary. It hums inside stoves and lamps, a servant obedient to switches and wires. But to those earliest humans, it was alive. It breathed, it fed, It danced, it protected, and it could just as easily turn against them. It was their first true miracle, and their first teacher. Every band had someone who watched the fire. Sometimes an old woman, sometimes a young one too injured to hunt. Sometimes a man who'd lost family and found meaning in the quiet duty of tending flame. They called her, or him, the keeper. No one slept before the keeper did. No one woke before her eyes opened. At night she would feed the embers with pine resin, whispering soft sounds that were not words but intention, a language of breath and care. If a storm howled, she shielded it with her body. If a spark jumped, she caught it before it touched fur or child. And when morning came, she coaxed it back to life, breathing warmth into the ashes as if reviving a small sleeping god. Fire was the heart of the tribe. They did not worship it, but they respected it as deeply as they respected hunger or sky. Long before they learned to make it themselves, they borrowed fire from lightning. Imagine it. A storm rolling across frozen plains, the air split with white light, a tree struck and blazing. The tribe watching from a distance, frightened but fascinated, feeling both the danger and the invitation. One of them, braver or more desperate than the rest, stepped forward with a branch. He thrust it into the flame, then ran through wind and rain to carry it home, a single fragile spark clinging to a stick of smoking wood. If it survived the journey, they had warmth for another night. If it went out, they waited for another storm. Fire was a visitor from the sky, and to hold it was to hold a piece of the divine. They soon learned that fire did more than warm. It cooked food, making meat softer and safer. It hardened the tips of spears, turning fragile wood into weapon. It dried hides, and smoked fish, so it would last through lean months. Even the smoke had purpose. It drove away insects, preserved meat, and marked their camps so hunters could find their way home. But most important of all, fire gave them time. Before it, darkness ended every day. Work stopped with sunset, conversation fell silent, and fear pressed close. With fire the night opened. They could see one another, they could repair tools, teach children, sit together in safety. The first fires turned evenings into community, and from community came memory. Picture them, 20 or so figures gathered around the flame, faces half-shadowed, half golden, each one alive with thought. They sat close, not from fear, but from the quiet magnetism of warmth. Children stared into the coals, seeing shapes of animals and stars. An elder traced lines in the dirt showing the curve of a river, the path of the herd, the meaning of the hunt. They could not yet write, but around that fire they began to speak. Simple sounds first, grunts, clicks, gestures, until one evening a sound became symbol, and symbol became shared understanding. Fire had given them more than heat. It had given them the space to imagine meaning. Speech was born beside the flame. To them, fire was not a tool, but a creature. It needed food, wood, fat, moss, dry grass. It needed shelter from wind. It needed companionship, because left alone it sulked, shrinking into ash. Children learned its moods early. They played near it carefully, testing what they could and could not do. When sparks bit skin, they learned respect. When smoke rose, they learned to read the wind. Some evenings they would sit and watch it as others might watch the sea, mesmerized by its motion, its whispering song. They called it the Red Spirit, though later tongues would call it by other names: flame, hearth, light, home. To live with fire was to live with responsibility. It demanded care, but it repaid that care 1,000-fold. As generations passed, they learned to build better homes for fire. At first it was only a pit in the dirt, then a circle of stones, later a carefully shaped hearth of clay and ash, able to hold coals for days. The hearth became the centre of every camp, a small sun that never set. When they moved to new shelters, they carried glowing embers wrapped in moss. A spark could travel 100 miles and light a new life on distant ground. In that way, fire was the first thread to connect generations. Every flame was the child of another. Winter nights were long, sometimes 20 hours of darkness and cold. While others slept, a watcher always stayed awake. It was a sacred rotation. Each adult took their turn beside the hearth, tending the fire, listening to the sounds beyond the stone walls. There was a rhythm to it. Add wood, stir ash, glance toward the mouth of the cave. Sometimes the watcher saw eyes gleaming in the dark, wolf, fox, or bear. The watcher would not shout or move, only place a burning stick by the entrance, a warning of light. Predators feared flame. They always had. Even now the wild things still keep their distance from it, as though memory of those old fires lives in their blood. The watcher's vigil was lonely, but not sad. It was a conversation with the elements, a dialogue between human and world. When the watcher whispered to the fire whispered back, its crackle an ancient language of reassurance. As fires grew larger, so did imagination. The light carved shapes into the walls, shadows that leapt and shifted like spirits. Someone began to speak of them, to give names to those shapes, to describe what they might mean. A running deer on the stone became a story, a chase, a triumph, a lesson in endurance. A flickering shadow became a warning, the ghost of a storm, the memory of a hunt gone wrong. Soon every camp had a storyteller, the one who remembered not just what happened, but how it felt. The first historians, the first poets, and all because of firelight. It was in those long nights that humanity learned to dream while awake. No one knows when the first humans struck stone to make fire. Perhaps it was an accident, flint against flint, a flash, a smell of smoke, the leap of something divine. The one who saw it must have frozen in awe, realizing they could summon what once belonged only to the sky. Lightning could be made by hand. The heavens could be borrowed at will. It changed everything. No longer did they wait for storms. Now they created warmth, protection, and light whenever they needed. The first sparks were more powerful than any invention since. They turned humans from guests in the wilderness into its quiet stewards. With fire, they could survive anywhere. The earth became their home. In time, the people came to understand that the flame outside mirrored the one within. Anger burned, love warmed, grief smouldered, joy flared. When someone died, their body was given to the fire, and their spirit believed to rise with the smoke. The living gathered around, eyes wet, hearts heavy, watching as the flames lifted what could not be held. It was the first form of remembrance, not to destroy, but to release. The first funerals, the first sense of after. Fire, once borrowed from the heavens, had become a bridge back to it. And so, as centuries passed, the rhythm continued. Every morning began with the keeper's breath on embers. Every night ended with the soft glow of coals fading to red. Children grew old, tending the same flame their ancestors once carried. The sun rose, the ice retreated, the world changed, but the miracle of fire remained constant. Even now, when we strike a match, when we light a candle or sit beside a campfire, we are repeating a gesture made 1,000,000 years ago. Our hands remember, even if our minds have forgotten. The warmth that touches our skin is the same warmth that once kept those first families alive in the dark. The flame has never died. It only changes hands. The people rose before dawn, the stars were still bright in the sky, and the frost made the earth glitter as if scattered with shards of glass. They moved quietly, careful not to waste warmth or breath. Every step in the snow left a story behind. Who had walked there? How heavy they were? Whether they had hope or hunger ahead of them? This was a day for hunting. The cave smelled faintly of smoke and hide. In its half-darkness, the firekeeper stirred the embers awake. A woman tore strips of dried meat and handed them to the hunters. A thin meal, but enough to wake the body. Each man took his spear, his sling, his stone blade, and checked the leather binding that held it all together. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The rhythm of the hunt was older than words. Outside, the air cut sharp against their skin. They breathed steam and kept their eyes low, watching the shapes of the land, reading the world the way we read letters. A snapped twig could be a sentence. A patch of disturbed snow might tell a whole story. The hunt was never chaos. It was a slow dance with the world. They moved as one, a thin line through frost, each knowing where to place a foot, where the ground might echo too loudly. The lead hunter, a tall man with the grey eyes of the north, paused at a ridge and knelt. His breath stilled. He touched a depression in the snow. A print, wide and deep, the mark of a reindeer herd that had passed not long ago. He brushed it gently, feeling the soft melt where body heat still lingered. He lifted his head, and the others came to stillness behind him. They would follow. The trail wound through sparse forest and out onto open tundra. Their world was both vast and small, endless horizon, but every detail known. They had walked these valleys 100 times. They knew which hollows held wind, where snow hid thin ice, where wolves liked to watch. They moved for hours without words. Only the crunch of steps, the whisper of furs against skin, the faint rattle of stone tools hanging from belts. By midday they found them. Far across the plain, a herd of reindeer grazed on patches of lichen exposed by wind. Steam rose from their bodies, a faint shimmer in the cold light. The hunters crouched behind a low ridge. They waited for the wind to turn so it would carry scent away from the animals, not toward them. Patience was everything. A careless breath could end a day's work. When the moment came, they spread out silently, forming a crescent across the snow. Each man moved with the certainty of habit, each footfall placed where it would not crunch. The lead hunter raised his hand, one gesture, the signal. Then the world erupted. They shouted once, a sudden terrifying sound in the quiet valley, and ran. The herd scattered, hooves pounding like thunder over ice. 2 men veered left, cutting the edge of the herd. Another ran straight through the centre, herding them toward the narrow gorge ahead. The air filled with breath, snow, motion. A spear flew, a sharp hiss through wind, and struck deep into the shoulder of a reindeer. It stumbled, crashed to its knees. Before it could rise, a second spear found its heart. Silence returned all at once, as if the world exhaled. The hunters stood, chests heaving, frost steaming from their mouths. They looked not triumphant, but calm. There was no cheer, no cry of victory, only quiet respect. One knelt beside the fallen animal, placing his hand on its neck, feeling the last tremor of life. He whispered softly, a sound more like breath than speech. "We thank you," a promise not to waste what had been given. The kill was only the beginning. They worked quickly, for the cold preserved, but the daylight did not. One cut open the belly with a flint knife, steam rising from within like ghostly breath. Another gathered the fat, carefully storing it in hide pouches, precious fuel for lamps and bodies alike. Others stripped the hide, folded it neatly and bound it with sinew. Nothing would be left behind. Even the bones had use. Tools, needles, fish hooks, or ornaments carved into stories of the hunt. The women and elders would meet them halfway home to help carry the weight. Until then, the hunters bore it on their shoulders, a slow procession back toward the cave. The sun had begun to lower, its light fading from white to gold to grey. The air thickened with the first hints of night. They moved silently, their burden heavy but sacred. The valley stretched around them, empty, endless, and somehow alive with their footsteps. When the hunters returned, smoke already curled from the cave mouth. The others had seen them coming. The children ran to meet them, their shouts echoing through the cold. Lura, the firekeeper, smiled without words. The hunters laid the reindeer on a bed of clean snow outside, and together the tribe set to work. Meat was sliced thin and laid over hot stones. Fat dripped, hissing, sending the smell of food curling into the night. For a moment the world felt safe, contained, a small circle of warmth in an ocean of cold. The firelight painted everything in red and gold. Faces glowed, hands passed food, tore meat, shared silence. After hunger was quieted, someone began to hum, a deep rhythmic tone that matched the crackle of the flames. Another joined, then another. It became a song without words, a kind of heartbeat for the tribe. They sang not of victory but of balance, that for every life taken another must rise and the fire must always burn clean. Children fell asleep where they sat, heads resting on fur-wrapped knees. Elders dozed by the fire. The hunters stared into the coals, their eyes far away. In that stillness they were both animal and something more, creatures of hunger and hope, bound to the same eternal rhythm, to hunt, to eat, to give thanks, to rest, and to begin again when morning came. But the hunt did not always end in safety. Sometimes a spear broke. Sometimes the wind shifted too soon. A wounded animal could turn on its pursuers with deadly force. One winter, the youngest hunter was caught beneath a charging bison. The tribe dragged him free, but his leg was shattered. They carried him home on a sled of branches and hide. For weeks he lay near the fire, his mother crushing herbs for pain, his friends bringing him broth. The firelight danced across his pale face. They did not know if he would live, but they did what they could. When the boy finally stood again, limping but alive, they celebrated not with feast, but with quiet gratitude. His limp became a reminder. Every hunt carried risk. Survival was never a right. It was a gift renewed each day. At night, after a hunt, wolves came to the edge of the clearing. They waited patiently, yellow eyes shining just beyond the reach of light. The tribe threw bones and scraps into the snow. The wolves crept forward, snatched them, then melted back into darkness. It was an unspoken truce. Predators recognized predators. They both hunted, both raised young, both fought the cold. In time, the wolves learned not to fear the campfire. They lingered closer. And one day, a small one stayed. Thin, curious, trembling. A child offered it food. It took it, and from that moment, a friendship older than history began. The first bond between human and wolf. The tribe didn't yet understand what they had created. They only knew that the nights felt less lonely when the howling came from near the fire instead of beyond it. When spring came, the snows melted and the rivers grew fat with meltwater. The herds moved north, and the people followed. The hunt changed shape with the season, from reindeer to elk, from fish to bird. Each had its own rhythm, its own ritual. The hunters became part of that rhythm, their footsteps woven into the great pattern of migration. They were not masters of the wild. They were students of it, and that humility kept them alive. When they returned to camp, their bodies bore scars and their hearts bore stories. Children crowded around to hear them, listening as if to myths, though these were not myths at all, only the truth of daily life. The hunt was not about death. It was about the fragile peace between life and hunger, between giving and taking, between the small warmth of fire and the endless cold beyond it. As the years passed, the pattern never changed. The hunters grew old, their sons and daughters took up the spears, and the valley remembered each footstep. Every spring they followed the herds, every autumn they prepared for snow, every winter they sat by the fire and sang. The hunt was not an event, it was existence itself, a breath shared between humankind and the wild world. And even now, thousands of generations later, the rhythm remains. When we walk through forests, when we sit beside fires, something ancient stirs in us. It is the memory of the hunt, of patience, of respect, of life carried forward through courage and care. The people of that age did not call it history. They called it living. And in their quiet, determined way, they were right. The hunt had ended. Smoke still hung in the air, thin and pale, drifting toward the grey sky. Inside the cave, the people rested. Some cleaned hides, others repaired the hearth, and a few simply sat with eyes half closed, listening to the crackle of wood and the distant murmur of melting snow outside. This was not laziness. It was the rhythm of life, a breath between labours, a pause in which imagination began to bloom. Long before anyone built a city or wrote a word, there came a single moment that separated the animal from the dreamer. A man sat beside a stream, holding a broken stone. He turned it over in his hand, watching the sunlight glint off the sharp edge. He struck it again, and another flake fell away, thinner, sharper, cleaner. Something stirred behind his eyes, a quiet understanding that shape could be made, not just found. That moment, when instinct became invention, was the birth of craft and the first whisper of art. He returned to the camp and showed the others. They gathered around, passing the stone from hand to hand, feeling the edge, nodding in silence. Soon they were all trying, striking flint against core, learning how angles broke clean or shattered wrong. It took hours, days, weeks, but in time the rhythm of creation became as familiar as the rhythm of hunting. Stone became knife, bone became needle, wood became spear. And slowly, the world changed shape beneath human hands. The cave was never silent now. From morning till dusk the air rang with the tap of hammerstones, the scrape of hide stretched on frame, the hiss of fat rendered over fire. The people worked in rhythm, and that rhythm became a kind of music. A woman softened leather by pulling it between her hands, the motion steady, her breath timed with effort. A man sharpened a blade, each strike of flint against flint a percussion note. Children hummed low songs as they worked, imitating the sounds of birds or the wind. The act of creation soothed them. It gave meaning to the long days when the hunt was done and snow still covered the valley. They were no longer waiting for the world to feed them. They were learning to shape the world in return. Every tool had a purpose, and every purpose had a spirit. There were knives for cutting meat, axes for breaking bone, needles made from bird bone for stitching hides. Each was given care and sometimes even a name. The maker's touch mattered. A well-balanced spear could mean the difference between life and death, so each craftsman learned to listen to the material, the way stone fractured, the way wood flexed, the way sinew tightened as it dried. They had no rulers or numbers, but they had instinct, and instinct was perfect enough. When the tool was done, it was tested by fire or by hand. If it failed, it was not discarded. It was studied, understood, improved. Through failure, they learned patience. Through patience, they learned mastery. It was not a trade. It was a conversation with the world. One evening, after a day of work, a young woman sat by the fire holding a piece of antler. She turned it over and over, then began to carve. The others watched. Her hands moved slowly, her knife tracing delicate lines. Soon the shape of an animal emerged. A bison, captured mid-run. Its muscles curved, its horns arched. It was alive, even though it was bone. When she finished, she set it by the fire. The flames made it shimmer as if it moved. The tribe fell silent. They had made tools before. They had built shelters, tanned hides, and crafted weapons. But this was something different. It was beauty for its own sake. And for the first time, the people understood that creation could feed not only the body, but the soul. They began to carve more. Birds, fish, spirits, faces that might have been gods or ancestors. Each shape was a message to the unseen. The walls of the cave soon bloomed with colour. They crushed minerals, red ochre, black charcoal, yellow clay, mixed them with fat, and painted what they knew: the chase, the herd, the fire, the night. They painted the hunt not to boast, but to remember. It was their way of saying, "We were here, we lived, we saw." When the paintings were finished, they gathered around them. Firelight flickered over the walls, making the painted beasts seem to move. Children gasped, elders smiled, and someone began to speak. At first, it was gestures, hands mimicking the throw of a spear, the leap of prey, the swing of an arm. Then came sounds, short and rhythmic, half chant, half tale. Soon, the whole tribe joined in, a chorus of motion and sound, telling the story of the day's hunt, the danger, the courage, the reward. The cave filled with laughter and gasps and the deep hum of shared memory. This was how the first stories were born, not written, not sung, but lived again through the voice and body. Every story became a lesson: how to track, how to survive, how to hope. And each retelling kept the past alive. For the first time, memory had a heartbeat. As the ice began to melt and the rivers swelled, they left the cave for the open plains. They carried their tools, their fire, their stories. The world around them was transforming. Grass pushing through snow, birds returning, the air filled with scent and sound. Their tools changed with the seasons too. They wove baskets from reeds, built traps for fish, and sharpened digging sticks to pull roots from the thawing soil. Work became easier, and with that ease came time to think. They sat by the fire at night watching sparks rise into darkness and began to wonder not only how to live, but why. The children asked what lay beyond the hills. The elders said it was another world filled with spirits and sky. The thought was comforting. They were not alone. The world was full of others, invisible perhaps, but present in wind, stone, and flame. The cave paintings became part of their rituals. Before every hunt, the leader would touch the image of the bison on the wall. He would whisper to it, asking for balance, for success, for mercy. When they returned from a hunt, they added new marks, lines for each animal taken, dots for each hunter who returned. It was their way of speaking to the unknown, of trying to make sense of a world that was beautiful but cruel. The act of painting, of carving, gave shape to their fears. It made the invisible visible. It turned chaos into pattern, and pattern into peace. And perhaps that is what art has always been, a fire against the dark. Not all creativity was sacred. Some of it was practical. They learned to twist fibres together to make rope, to shape clay into small vessels, to grind seeds into powder between flat stones. Every new idea was tested by necessity. A broken tool meant danger. A clever one meant survival. They discovered how to make glue from boiled hide, how to trap fish beneath the ice, how to build shelters that held heat longer. Each discovery was shared freely. There were no secrets, no ownership of ideas. Knowledge belonged to the tribe, as fire belonged to all. When something worked, they passed it on, generation to generation, word to word, hand to hand. That is how civilization truly began, not with kings or empires, but with one person showing another how to make life a little less hard. At night, when the work was done, they would sit together in the dark. No one spoke for a long time. Only the fire moved, its light breathing across the walls. A child would lean against her mother, an elder would close his eyes and smile. The air would hum softly with the crackle of wood, the sigh of wind beyond the cave mouth, and the deep, slow rhythm of human breathing. In that silence, the world felt whole. They did not know they were inventing art, or culture, or history. They only knew that they were alive and that life was good when shared. They had made tools, and through tools they had made time. They had made pictures, and through pictures they had made memory. They had made stories, and through stories they had made meaning. They had, in their quiet way, invented being human. The day fades slowly in the Ice Age. The light lingers low across the land, turning snow into rivers of gold before slipping behind the mountains. The air changes first, the warmth of afternoon collapsing into the sharp chill of dusk. For the people of the caves, this hour was sacred. It was a time to return, to gather, to draw close to the small circle of light that had kept them alive for generations. The work ended when the shadows reached the cave mouth. Tools were set aside. Children were called in from the frozen ridge. The firekeeper fed the hearth, and the smoke rose slow and blue into the hollow roof. Outside, the first stars emerged, cold, steady points of light that no one could name, but everyone felt. They believed the stars were eyes, the spirits of ancestors watching from the sky, guiding the hunt, guarding the living. When they looked up, they felt less alone. Inside, the world was small. The fire painted every stone with life. Shadows leapt and stretched across the walls, dancing with the painted beast that lived there. The air smelled of smoke, fat and damp leather. The sound of crackling wood mingled with quiet breaths and murmured voices. The people sat in a wide circle, the youngest near the flames, the oldest at the edges, close enough to speak, far enough to think. No one commanded this order. It was simply how warmth moved, how generations arranged themselves without words. The night's tasks were gentle ones: a hide to mend, a broken tool to fix, a spear point to sharpen. These small movements filled the silence, the steady rhythm of existence. Children leaned against their parents, fingers tracing the grain of wood or the smooth edge of a bone carving. They didn't know they were learning. They thought they were only watching. But in their quiet observation, the memory of a people was being passed down. The cave had its own heartbeat. Every flicker of the fire revealed the curve of walls, the faint sheen of paint, the mark of countless hands pressed against stone. They had painted those hands in red ochre long ago, not as art but as proof. Each palm was a promise. I was here. In that light they felt safe. The world outside was wild and endless. Wolves, storms, cold and silence. But here, inside the cave, there was warmth, sound and presence. It was the oldest kind of home. Sometimes, when the wind was fierce, they heard it rushing through cracks in the stone, a low moan like breath. To them the cave was alive. It protected them, and in return they treated it with reverence. They never shouted in its depths. They never carved carelessly into its walls. They whispered, as if speaking in a temple. After the meal, meat roasted on sticks, roots warmed in ashes, the taste of smoke and salt still on their tongues, came the song. It was never the same twice. It had no beginning, no end. Sometimes one voice began softly, a low hum rising and falling like breath. Then another joined, and another, until the whole cave pulsed with sound, a living vibration that filled every space. There were no instruments then, except the body itself. A hand striking thigh for rhythm, a stick tapping stone, a voice rising into the dark. The song had no words, but it carried feeling, gratitude, longing, remembrance. Children fell asleep to it. their small bodies heavy against furs. Adults closed their eyes, breathing slow, their hearts in time with the pulse of flame. The song was more than music, it was connection. It reminded them that they were one, many bodies, one warmth, one breath. When the fire sank to embers, silence returned. The only sounds were the drip of melted frost from the ceiling and the low sighs of sleeping people. They slept close, curled together on layers of grass, moss and hide. Children between parents, elders near the hearth to feed it if the wind threatened. It was not comfort in our sense. The air was cold, the stone unyielding, but there was peace in proximity. Their warmth pooled together, a single shared life in the heart of the dark. Sleep then was not empty. It was filled with visions. They dreamed of animals, of running herds and glimmering eyes, of fire that spoke, of ancestors walking through snow without leaving prints. In the morning some remembered, some didn't. But those who dreamed deeply became the ones the tribe turned to in times of uncertainty. They were not yet shamans, not yet priests, just people who listened carefully to what sleep whispered. When a dream warned of danger or revealed where animals might roam, the others believed. Dreams were messages, and night was a bridge between worlds. Every fire cast a boundary between light and dark. Beyond it, the world continued, unseen, unknowable, yet close enough to hear. Sometimes, when the wind paused, they could make out footsteps in the snow, the snap of a twig, the faint cry of something wild. No one was afraid of these sounds. They were reminders that life existed everywhere, that the world was full and awake even when they rested. Occasionally a wolf's shape would pass in front of the cave mouth, pausing to watch. Its eyes glowed like coals. Then it would vanish again, a ghost into night. One of the elders once said the wolves carried lost souls on their backs, those who had died wandering too far from the fire. When the pack howled, they were calling those souls home. So when the wind carried that sound across the valley, the people didn't tremble. They listened and whispered thanks. Not everyone slept at once. As in the days of the hunt, there was always one watcher, a soul chosen to keep the fire alive through the night. It was a lonely honour, but never a punishment. Those who kept watch said it was the quietest time in the world. They would sit close to the coals, feeding them a little wood now and then, watching the flames curl upward like breath made visible. Sometimes they thought they saw shapes in the smoke, faces, animals, flickers of something old and knowing. They did not look away. They simply nodded, as if acknowledging a visitor. The watchers' eyes grew heavy, but they dared not sleep. The fire must not die. If the coals dimmed too much, they pressed a branch into the heart of it, coaxed it back to life with breath. The glow returned, and with it, the quiet joy of success. When dawn finally crept across the cave walls, the watcher felt as if they had travelled through time itself, from darkness into rebirth. From these nights of warmth and dream, belief began. They had seen too much wonder to think the world was empty. They felt the pulse of the earth through their feet, heard voices in thunder and rain, saw messages in the stars. They didn't build temples or idols. They didn't need to. The cave was a temple, the fire was a god, the wind was a messenger. Every meal was a prayer. Their faith had no rules, only respect. If they took, they gave back. If they hunted, they thanked. If they lived, they remembered. This was the first religion, not of names or books, but of connection. A quiet, constant gratitude that they existed at all. When one of them died, the body was wrapped in fur, a small fire lit beside it. The tribe gathered around, eyes reflecting the flame. They did not speak much, for they had no words for forever, but they felt it. They understood that the person before them had simply gone ahead to another kind of mourning. They placed gifts near the body, a tool, a carving, a bit of food, so the spirit would not travel empty-handed. Then they sealed the grave with stone and sang a low song until the sky turned pale. Sometimes, long after, they felt the presence of those who had gone. A sudden breeze in the cave, a flicker in the flame, a familiar dream. Death was not an end to them. It was another journey through nightfall, guided by firelight into the great unknown. And so each day ended as it always had, with the people of the cave drawing close to the flame, their faces golden in the dark, their voices fading into whispers and sleep. The stars turned slowly above, the wolves sang, the fire sighed. They dreamed of hunts and rivers and children yet unborn. They dreamed of things no one would ever name, and in those dreams the first human imagination stretched beyond survival into the realm of wonder. They did not know that their small glowing circle was the beginning of all stories, of music, of art, of belief, of every fire we have ever sat beside since. Night after night they kept the world alive through warmth and dream, and in their sleep they carried us forward, toward everything we would become. Change announces itself in whispers before it speaks in thunder. Birds arrive later than last year. The berries that once blushed in midsummer stay stubbornly green. Wind turns from a friend to a stranger, sharp, impatient, carrying dust instead of snow. An elder lifts a handful of soil, rubs it between finger and thumb, and tastes. There is a new bitterness there, a new dryness. He does not call it drought. He calls it warning. Children are sent to watch the river for the first thin pane of surface ice in autumn. They count the nights. They compare with stories. Your grandmother said the river wore its winter skin by the first long moon. Now the moon is fatter, the river still speaking water. Something is shifting. The animals know first. Reindeer choose a higher ridgeline. Elk gather in valleys they once avoided. A mammoth cow leads her calves over a pass no hunter has yet crossed, following a memory older than maps. The people watch, and where the animals go, they go, not as conquerors, as learners. They break camp with a practiced tenderness. Coals swept into a turtle shell of clay to be carried ahead, cordage coiled, hides shaken free of frost, stone tools counted and wrapped in grass. Someone leaves a small figure carved from antler on a shelf of rock, a thank you to the cave that held their winter. They step into morning light as if into a promise. No paths are marked, no cairns line the way, but the air itself teaches direction. How a north wind tastes of salt when it has crossed a distant sea of ice. How a warm south breath brings the smell of wet earth and thawed roots. They read the sky for more than weather. High thin clouds like fish bones mean another day to travel. A dome of blue so clear it seems to ring if you struck it. That is a good day to cross the open plain where wolves also follow the herds. By night, stars are not gods alone but instruments. The bright one that never moves, always above the black spine of pine, tells north without argument. In summer, a pale river of light pours from horizon to horizon. They learn its bends and islands of brightness, carrying them in memory the way we carry names. As seasons kneel and rise, the people return to places that remember them. Spring camp smells of thaw and sap. Tents of hide go up between willow stands, close to a marsh where geese return with a clamour like laughter. Women set basket traps for fish in the shallows. Children learn to pluck feathers with the wind at their backs. Men cut new spear shafts from straight green saplings and set them aside to cure. Summer camp sits on a shoulder of dry ground above a bend in the river. Here the valley is a bowl of green sound. Flies, frogs, wings. Roots are dug and laid on flat stones to dry. Berries stain fingers purple. A paste of fruit and meat, spread thin and sun-cured, becomes sweet, durable food for leaner days. At night the fire is small, more for companionship than warmth. Stories are told slowly without hurry, as if time itself has leaned in to listen. Autumn camp faces south to drink the last long warmth. This is the season of work that looks like patience. Meat sliced into ribbons for smoke, fat rendered to clear tallow, skin scraped and softened with brain and stone, cord woven, points repaired. A cache pit is dug where ground stays cool. Rocks are lifted into place like sentences that say, "We will be back. Keep this for us." Winter camp returns to a cave or a shelter built of logs and turf. Snow banks the outer walls. Inside, the hearth has a voice the people know better than their own. The days are short and filled with small important labours, mending, sharpening, teaching, and the nights are a deep school of dream. Change is not survived by strength alone, but by memory. Elders carry calendars, not in leaf or bark, but behind the eyes. They know when the moon sits low and wide, when the salmon run makes the river peel back its silver skin, when the caribou move as if pulled by a thread only they can see. They teach by asking. What did the wind say this morning? How old was the snow on the north slope? Where did the ravens gather after the storm? Children answer with their whole bodies, running the shape of a valley on bare feet, drawing a herd's path in ash with a stick, imitating the call of a bird until the bird answers from the spruce. The people do not hoard knowledge, they turn it outward, like a fire with room for more hands. Sometimes, on the long curve of a migration, small figures appear on a distant ridge. They are not wolves, they move like you do, upright, in a braid of shadow. Another band. Approach is ritual. Spears lowered, palms open, heads tilted so the eyes are clear. Gifts move first. A twist of sinew, a flake of good flint, a shell carried from a far southern water. Trade is quiet and precise. From them, you learn there is a valley ahead where wind scours snow from lichen, even in deep cold. From you, they learn a way to set a fish weir that holds against flood. For a few nights, fires double on the plain. Children chase in games with no shared language but shared rules. Two elders sit knee to knee, comparing scars like maps. A woman shows how she coils grass into a basket that will carry water. A man sharpens a stranger's blade until it can turn hair at an arm's-length touch. When parting comes, nothing is signed. But the earth has been slightly improved, stitched with a stronger thread of understanding. Seasons design their own tools. In spring, digging sticks fire-hardened for tubers in thawing ground. Nets knotted from twisted plant fibres, their mesh spaced by memory. Hooks carved from bone just wide enough to hold a trout's impatient mouth. In summer, baskets for berries with rims that do not bruise fruit. Light-throwing lances balanced by a thumb's quick test. A frame for drying fish that laughs at wind. In autumn, scrapers with a bite suited to cold, stiff hides. Needles sleek as thorns threaded with sinew. Stone hammers just heavy enough to crack marrow without shattering bone. In winter, snowshoes lashed with rawhide where drift turns treacherous. Sleds of bent willow that flex instead of splinter. Lamps made from hollowed stone, burning fat with a small, faithful flame. A tool is never only a thing. It is a conversation between season and hand. No one plants on purpose yet. But where camp was kept the summer before, where scraps fell, where seeds from crushed berries were spat into laughter, green returns thicker than in the wild surrounding it. Someone notices. They return to the fat ground next warm season, and again it is generous without being asked. They begin to think of places not as stops, but as partners, locations that offer more each time you greet them well. A woman presses a handful of seeds into a seam of damp soil near a flat, warm rock, covers them with the tenderness she uses for a sleeping child, and forgets to expect anything. Weeks later, she finds leaves that look like the taste of last year. She smiles but doesn't name the act. Naming will come much later. For now, it is just another way the world says yes when you are paying attention. Wolves still trace the edges of camp, but some no longer vanish when eyes find them. The small one that stayed last winter returns with a broader chest and a calmer tail. It lies near the line where light thins into dark, ears turning to sounds your ears cannot pass. Children drop scraps. The creature pretends not to notice. When danger approaches, the slow, heavy breath of a bear moving upslope, the not-quite wolf moves first, not forward into foolishness, but back to the fire, body rigid, sound low and round like a drum struck far away. People see, people understand. A quiet treaty deepens, warmth and food for warning, company for company. A door opens between species and both step through without breaking stride. Not every season is a teacher with soft hands. Sometimes the lesson is written with ice. A warm winter turns to glass overnight. Freezing rain lays a skin over everything. Hooves slide, tracks lie. A man falls and a spear snaps and a silence falls that is not the good kind. The camp changes shape in a day. Tents lowered, ropes doubled, wood carried inside to keep it from locking itself to the world. Paths are brushed with ash to show safer footing. Children are not allowed to run. Songs turn small and bright, like coals banked tight to last till morning. When the thaw returns, it is not triumph, but release. Tools are mended, rules are revised. Someone carves a notch on the haft of a shovel. The mark means ice like glass. Remember, there are places where the world pulls itself taut between lands. When the sea goes to think for 1,000 winters, a road appears, a bridge made of earth and cold. Bands follow the herds across it as if walking a sentence that never ends. On one side, a sky you know. On the other, smells that make your chest feel new. Resin you cannot name, a grass that sings under wind like string. They do not call it migration. They call it going where life goes. Children born on the far shore learn from parents who still dream of the old hills. Grandchildren learn from ground that dreams only of them. Home stretches, then settles, and the heart stretches with it. Change peels away what is extra. What remains are a few unbreakable threads. Fire, the small sun that travels with you, asks for care, gives more than it takes. Kin, not just blood, but the hands that know how you carry weight and where you place a joke. Ritual, touching the painted bison before a long hunt, leaving a carved pebble when a camp is broken. Not superstition, but continuity. Teaching. A story told again not because you forgot, but because each hearing lays another thin, strong layer, like varnish against weather. Gratitude, not a posture, a practice. The way meat is shared, the way the last ember is tucked like a child before sleep. These are the walls of a house that can be lifted, carried and rebuilt anywhere the wind will let you stay. Seasons spin. Children who watch the river for ice now send their children to the bank at dusk. Elders who read the soil's bitterness hand the skill to hands that tremble for different reasons. The paths across the plain are not roads, but they are grooves in the mind that outlast lifetimes. And still, the people change. They learn to linger longer where the ground feeds back. They return more surely to the fat places, build racks that do not fall, weave nets that do not tangle themselves when sleep is heavy and dawn decisive. They are not yet farmers, but they are gardeners of time, cultivating memory, weeding habit, watering courage, thinning fear to let sturdier traits see sun. At last another turning. The air smells of rain that will stay instead of run away. Geese write their V with a steadier hand. The river carries not only melt but crumbs of softer banks. Someone stands in the doorway of the shelter and listens. The wind says there is room for more than hunger now. Not that hunger has ended, only that alongside it grows an idea with a slow pulse, that you can shape the season as surely as the season shapes you. The person nods. Behind them, a child wakes, a dog stretches, a kettle stone thumps gently as it's set on the coals. Another year opens its hands. The people step into it with the calm of those who have learned the oldest lesson, that life is not a straight road, but a circle walked with care, fire to fire, camp to camp, season to season, until the circle becomes a spiral, and the spiral, a path up into the dawn of something new. Morning arrives differently now. The frost still lingers, but it no longer bites so deep. The air feels gentler, as if the earth itself is exhaling after a long, cold dream. Generations have passed since the first people huddled in caves, and yet the rhythm of their lives still hums beneath every breath of wind. The world is changing. The great ice that once ruled the north begins to shrink, retreating into glittering rivers that feed valleys thick with new grass. Forests climb the hills again, birch and pine and willow reaching for the softer sun. Animals wander in numbers not seen in memory, and humanity, small, patient, enduring humanity, steps forward from the shadows of survival into the morning of creation. Caves had been faithful, but stone walls grew cold and wet in the thaw, so they began to build their own. At first, it was simple. Branches bent together and tied with sinew, covered in hides and packed with clay. Then stronger, with walls of turf or stacked stone, a ring of shelter with the hearth at its centre. A home was no longer borrowed, it was made. Smoke curled through the roof and into sky, a thread of connection between earth and heaven. Inside, warmth gathered and stayed. Children laughed without fear of wind. Mothers sang while grinding roots on flat stones. Fathers mended spears, their faces relaxed, no longer pressed tight by hunger. The people still moved with the seasons, but not as far. Certain places began to feel like more than stops. They felt like belonging. The wolves that once circled camp no longer watched from the shadows. They lay near the flames, heads resting on paws, their eyes half closed, their loyalty unspoken. Over time, their shapes changed. Smaller, gentler, their coats thicker, their trust deeper. Children slept beside them. Hunters fed them scraps. When danger approached, the not-quite wolves growled before any human heard. Together they became a new kind of family. A partnership older than history itself, man and wolf bound by fire. They didn't know what to call these companions yet, but the bond was clear. A silent promise shared between species. You will keep us safe, and we will keep you fed. From this quiet friendship the first dogs were born. It began by accident. A few grains fell near a campsite buried under ashen soil. When the people returned months later, they found green shoots waving in the wind. Curious, they stayed longer. They learned that plants could be guided, that the earth, like the hunt, could be coaxed with care. They began to scatter seeds on purpose, to dig small furrows, to wait. It was a new kind of patience, a slower hunt. Instead of chasing life, they invited it to come to them. And when the first harvest came, small, humble, enough for a single meal, they laughed. Not the laughter of surprise, but of recognition. As if they had always known the earth could do this, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to remember. The tribes began to meet more often. No longer strangers crossing paths on migrations, but neighbours with gifts to share. One brought obsidian from far mountains. Another offered salt from the sea. Others carried stories, songs that described rivers and stars and the shape of hope. Language blossomed like spring. Sounds turned into words, words turned into names. They began naming everything. Mountains, animals, children, dreams. To name something was to keep it alive in memory. It was a kind of magic stronger than fire. By the river's bend, a cluster of huts grew. The people had discovered something profound. Safety in numbers meant time to think, to rest, to create. Someone built a larger shelter for gatherings, a place for song and story. Someone else shaped clay into pots, learning that earth could hold water as easily as it held seed. Children played in open fields, their laughter echoing across the grass. The people began to age differently. Not from exhaustion, but from the slow fullness of a longer life. There was still danger, storms, beasts, hunger, but they faced it together now. And in that togetherness something like civilization stirred. When evening fell, they painted again, not deep inside caves this time, but on walls of clay homes under open sky. They painted suns instead of stars, hands raised in peace instead of hunt. They carved small figures of women heavy with life, and called them mothers of plenty. Music changed too. They stretched sinew across hollow bone, blowing wind through it to make songs that rose like birds. They discovered rhythm in heartbeat, and melody in breath. Each new sound was a celebration, a declaration that life was no longer just survival. It was expression. It was joy. In the warmth of new villages, children asked different questions. Not will we eat? But what lies beyond that hill? Not will the fire last? But what else might we build? The world felt open again, but this time not as an enemy, as an invitation. Elders told stories of how it had all begun. The long winters, the hunt, the fire, the first songs sung in the dark, and every child listening knew somehow that those stories were not only about the past, they were the roots of the future. They looked up at the same stars their ancestors had watched from the caves and saw not spirits anymore, but maps, guides for journeys they had not yet taken. Even now the fire burned at the centre of every home. It was smaller than before, contained in stone circles and clay bowls, but its meaning was unchanged. People still gathered around it at night. They still told stories. They still found peace in its light. Every spark that rose into the air carried memory, a thread stretching back through uncounted generations to that first moment when someone borrowed lightning and made it their own. The flame was never just heat. It was everything. It was family, it was memory, it was humanity itself. And then, one morning, as mist lifted from the valley, a child stepped out from a small hut and looked toward the rising sun. For the first time, the world no longer seemed endless and cruel. It seemed possible. The child squinted, held out their hand toward the light, and smiled. That moment, quiet, unnoticed, was the beginning of us. From that smile came everything that would follow: villages, songs, language, love, art, hope, and every dream ever dreamed beneath a roof or a sky. The Ice Age ended, but the warmth it taught never left. It lived in the people, in their fires, in their hearts, and it lives still, in every flame we light, in every story we tell, in every time we close our eyes and remember what it means to be human,